So, I want to talk about that new FNAF movie. Is it good? Is it better or worse than the first movie? Is it as bad as the critics say it is? I want to get into all that in this video, and we're going to be diving into spoilers, so you've been warned. So first things first, I want to address the critics for a second. I'm talking to you, critics. The 11-12% on Rotten Tomatoes, I think is crazy, I think is aggressive, and I can tell you exactly why the critics hate this movie. And it's because it was not made for them. Let me explain. So the first movie was setting up the world of Five Nights at Freddy's. It was setting up the world of spooky ghost kids, haunting the animatronic suits and everything, and a murderous villain in a yellow rabbit suit kills kids. It was very easy to understand while also having references and nods to fans like me who were able to get more of a kick out of it. Like, for instance, seeing Sparky's Diner in the first movie, the casual normie, moviegoer who just wants to see a, movie by Blumhouse Productions, who wants to see a movie about animatronic horror or anything like that, they would not understand what Sparky's about, what the reference is. But to FNAF fans, we see a reference to Sparky's and we're like, okay, we get a kick out of that. We do the Leonardo DiCaprio meme where we point out the screen and think, hey, I understand that reference. But the first movie was very easy to digest for the fans, but also for the casual moviegoer. This movie leans way harder on the fan base, where it was made for them. If you do not play the games, if you did not read the books, if you have not been following the lore and the story, you went into this movie not understanding what's going on because the movie was not made for you. Another reason why I think there's a huge discourse, simply look at the Rotten Tomato score of critics versus audience fan reaction. It's like 10, 11, 12% critics, but 80 to 90% audience. This is not the first time this has happened. For instance, the Super Mario Brothers movie from Illumination that came out 2 years ago had the same deal. Critics hated it because they didn't feel like there was much of a story, but audiences loved it. It was 80, 90%. But then the flip side, there's other movies out like Star Wars The Last Jedi where critics loved it because it tried to do all these different things. It felt different. It did not feel like a Star Wars movie. Critics hated The Force Awakens because it felt like a retelling of A New Hope. They liked The Last Jedi because it did not feel like a repeat, did not feel like a Star Wars movie. They were doing different things. However, on the flip side, audiences, fans, Star Wars fans, hated The Last Jedi because it did not feel like a Star Wars movie. It felt different. So anyway, those are things I wanted to touch on before I get into my review. Did I like this movie more than the first movie? And honestly, yes. I got a lot more enjoyment out of this movie. There's a lot of teases and references and setups in this movie that was literally made for the fans. So I was able to appreciate it a lot more. However, is the movie perfect? No. One of my biggest criticisms from the first movie was the animatronics not being killer. You get a situation where in the first movie, you would have Foxy, going down at the end of the hallway, and his feet, his rollerblade feet, would roll down to the end of the hallway in a huge camera close-up like this, and the camera would just cut to a completely different scene. You don't see Foxy, use his pirate hook and slash someone's skin open or something like that. Nothing gruesome like that. It was very, very tame. A lot of the kills were very quick cut, zoom cuts, a lot of aftermath where it's you assume that the person was attacked. You see the killer animatronic next to them, the camera will cut, and then the very next scene, you would see the killer animatronic, walk by, and you would not see the human again, and it basically just makes you put the two and two together, being okay, that person's dead, but you don't get to see them get murked. And I felt like one of the reasons why was because it was a PG-rated movie. This movie, PG-13, I had hopes that we were going to get more violence, more gore, and they were able to show the animatronics being killer because it being rated PG-13. Plus, you had people like Matthew Lillard come out and say, damn, this is way scarier than the first movie. And are we sure this is PG-13? I'll be honest, I'm still disappointed. Did they get to show more violence, more gore, more gruesome stuff than this first movie? Yes. However, it's not much of a victory, right? Like if I do a grading scale, if I had to rate the first movie as a 5, I would rate FNAF 2 in the killer animatronic department showing violence as like a 6, at best on its best day, a 6.5. So yes, while technically better, it still gets a failing grade. It still was not what I was looking for. I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. I'm disappointed because I've seen Blumhouse Productions make movies on low budgets, especially concerning killer animatronics, and they're able to show off some violence, some gore, some cruelty. And to me, Megan is a great example of that. Like, I want what they did with the violence in someone like Megan to be in FNAF, because they're both by Blumhouse Productions on low budgets, and they both deal with the same topic of killer animatronics going rogue and killing people. That's why I'm so disappointed in both the first movie and second movie that we did not get to see the kills that I expect, because I have high expectations, because I've seen Blumhouse at their best do stuff that I want to see. But when it comes to an IP like FNAF that I care about way more than Megan, I'm just disappointed, because you're able to do it with Megan, why can't you do it with FNAF? And it's very, very annoying. And if I'm not mistaken, Megan is also rated PG or PG-13. So using the PG or PG-13 rating as an excuse of why FNAF can't show violence, I tend to disagree with.
Hey, sorry for the interruption. Editing me for a second, just want to chime in and really hammer the point of what I was trying to say about the violence not being up to par in the FNAF movie, and the reason why I bring up Megan as an example of what I want to see and why my expectations are so high. So, the most brutal kill in FNAF, and I use brutal in quotes, is probably when Toy Chica kills the teacher by crushing their skull, and they say, oh, there's nothing going on inside that head of yours. Why it was so disappointing for me is they show a close-up of the teacher and everything while his head is being smashed and everything, and I was like, okay, in the theater, please, show blood, show his eyeballs popping out of his skull or something. But unfortunately, once I was getting that mindset, once my expectations were being floated a bit, okay, they learned from the first movie and they were able to get away with a lot more brutality. They instead did the exact problem why it was an issue for me in the first movie, where the camera is now quick cut to the floor and you hear him die and then you never see his body again. And the reason why I bring up Megan as an example, a counterpoint in why my expectations are so high, is because not only do they have the similarity of being by Blumhouse, but killer animatronics as well is also very similar. But also, as you saw, Megan is rated PG-13, just like FNAF 2 is rated PG-13. And if you watch Megan, at least the first one, you can see the violence. You can see stuff they're able to get away with. Like, for instance, there's a scene in the forest where Megan runs up to a boy and Megan rips off the boy's ear, and you can see the close-up of the skin peeling back and everything, and the blood spewing out as more of the skin gets retracted away and everything. Great! Like, I want to see stuff like that. Why can't FNAF get that kind of same treatment? And that's why I'm so disappointed. But anyway, that's why I want to say it. I just want to pop in for a second. Apologies if this ruins the pacing and everything what I was trying to say, but I don't think I showed examples of why my disappointment was what it is. So anyway, back to your regular schedule program. All right, so let's get into the real meat and potatoes of this video. Finally talking about FNAF 2 and getting the spoilers. And off the gate, off rip, I was surprised. It opening up on 1982.
which when I saw that in the theater, I was losing my mind because I'm like, oh my God, FNAF, Scott Cawthon, you did it again. You brought in a new year, a new date in the 80s. You did that with Into the Pit with 1985, where it's like, wait, Oswald took a ball pit to 1985? 1985 has never been an important year. We knew about 1983, 1987, but then the book came out and said 1985. And now you have 1982. And it's like, why do you bring in another year for the 80s that is not mentioned previously? But no, I thought the opening was great. I thought us getting introduced to Charlotte was great. I thought us getting to see the FNAF Into the Pit stuff from a child's perspective was great. And two things. A, I kind of wish we got that as the opening in the first movie, as opposed to the opening credits just did like an 8-bit minigame animation of that scene. I kind of wish that's how the first movie opened it, but seeing this movie was great. And two, I also want to give myself props because I kind of called it in one of my trailer reactions going into the FNAF 2 movie. When I saw the trailer of Charlotte, screaming high hell that around a pizzeria, I thought we were gonna see the FNAF Into the Pit where a child gets led into a back room by William Afton and killed. So I want to give myself a little rub on the shoulder that I predicted it. As much as I want to give myself props and stroke my own ego for a second, I did not expect where we'll go next. Doing the huge switch up, the huge Uno reverse card of instead of Charlotte being killed in the back alleyway by William Afton, which is something we've seen since the FNAF 2 minigame that we also saw in the Secret Puppet minigame and also Midnight Motorist in FNAF 6, having them be killed behind the stage, and then them also being the victim that is stabbed in front of everyone in the pizzeria is quite an interesting change, but I kind of liked it. If I'm being honest, I feel like the reason why they made that switch of instead of Charlie being killed in the back alleyway in the rain, them being killed and then falling on the stage and everything, grounded way of showing the scene of the puppet marionette showing up besides Charlotte's stabbed body and then possessing their body. Speaking of Midnight Motorist and Charlotte's death, I don't know if I was the only one who thought this, because to my knowledge, I haven't seen anyone else online bring this up. Following that opening, and it was Mike and Abby in their living room, and Abby was sitting in the chair watching TV and everything because Josh was going, or Mike, I should say, Mike was going on the date with Vanessa. Anyone else get Midnight Motorist vibes in that scene of someone sitting alone watching TV, someone at least in the house leaves and goes to a Freddy's establishment? Anyone else get Midnight Motorist vibes in that scene, or is it just me? I was surprised that there was a lot of security breach teases in this movie as well. First of all, you got the outright statement of when after Abby was able to hack into the systems of the toy animatronics and able to roam freely, and Mike was back at the pizzeria and trying to lock them all down and everything, it literally said in the bio screen, it says security breach. All right, movie. There was also other nods to security breach. You had Charlotte possessing and manipulating, controlling the animatronics through their circuits. Very interesting, because a popular theory is that Charlotte is basically a poltergeist in the security breach pizzaplex. Other security breach references that I thought of, how they're not able to leave the building because their power will be shut off. That to me screams references to endings from security breach, where at the end of the game and everything, Glamrock Freddy tells you that he can't leave the building because his servers will lock up after an hour. And in one of the comic strip endings, Gregory takes Freddy in a van and everything, and they drive off and everything. And then after some time driving, his Glamrock Freddy's power shuts down and everything. So Gregory uses jumper cables to boot into shut down Freddy and power him up again. So another nod to Security Breach was very, very interesting. But I don't know how this affects the timeline and everything, but the whole plot point of the animatronics not being allowed to roam freely was very, very interesting, because if you remember from FNAF 2 from the phone calls, the animatronics were able to roam freely up until the bite of 87. Once the bite of 87 happens, that's when the animatronics are shut down and they're no longer able to roam freely. We hear that in both the FNAF 1 and FNAF 2 phone calls. But in this situation, the animatronics not being allowed to roam freely means the bite of 87 already happened. Now let's address the huge elephant in the room for a second. The big reveals of the Circus Baby animatronic in the movie, but also Mike Schmidt versus Michael Afton. Circus Baby does make an appearance in this movie, and I was losing my mind when this happened. Not only that, but there was other nods to sister location. Henry handed Mike a music box that he used to put Charlotte to sleep. And once he opened the music box, the dancer in the music box that was tuned to the music was Ballora. So another nod to sister location. Another nod to sister location. The first time Michael Apton appears on screen is the three news reporters, investigators about paranormal activity. They come from a company that is related to scooping or scoopers. I can't remember the exact company name, but it has scoopers in the title. Another reference to sister location. And this may be another shot in the dark as far as a sister location reference. When Abby was beside Toy Chica, and Toy Chica's animatronic body was like shaking everything, and their stomach hatch opened, and out came the marionette jumping out and grabbing Abby. Is that a subtle nod reference to Elizabeth Afton walking up and getting close to the baby animatronic, getting lured by ice cream? Then when they get close enough, the stomach hatch of baby opened up, a claw came out and grabbed Elizabeth Afton? Because ever since the Abby name got revealed in the first movie, Abby being an anagram for baby, we've always thought that was going to be the fate. Not only were they about to be put in a spring lock baby suit in the first movie, but in this movie, you outright have them be next to an animatronic where their stomach hatch opens and something comes out and grabs them. Now they're not a baby. And we know, as I've just mentioned, baby does make an appearance in this movie. And with the other nods at sister location, tells me that's what's going to happen in the third movie. And to my knowledge, those are the only nods I caught in sister location. Let me know if there's any others I missed. But yes, Mike Schmidt versus Michael Afton. Does this make it a little bit bizarre that in the first movie, when Mike Schmidt went in to get interviewed by the GOAT Matthew Lillard, William Afton, trying to be a security guard for Five Freddy's, does make it a little bit bizarre that Matthew Lillard looked down at the resume of Mike Schmidt and was like, "You're Mike." And he pauses for a second. And everyone in their mind thought, oh, that's a nod because he realized that's his son, Michael Afton. And he didn't want to say anything. Well, now that theory's out the window because now it's Mike Schmidt versus Michael Afton. Michael Afton is now 100% in the universe and a different person. I'm trying to think about it for a second because on one hand, it seems like they went the route of a popular theory out there. Michael Afton was not seen as like a good person in the Five Nights at Freddy's universe. He was seen as a secondary villain, a secondary antagonist, where he wanted to carry out his father's legacy. To me, if you bring in Michael Afton, and with the tons of nods of sister location, him being introduced when you brought in that scooping company, you have the baby reference, the Ballora reference, and the fact that the final scene with Michael Afton, he gets clotheslined by the painter, and then you never see him again, you only see his badge, tells me that at the very minimum in the third movie, they're setting up a reveal for him to either be scooped or him to turn purple. Something's gonna happen. And I personally cannot wait for that. But Charlotte being the main villain of this movie and everything, I thought was handled great. I thought in the very beginning, the aforementioned scene of Charlotte getting stabbed by William Afton, and then the puppet coming out the stage, coming out the box, and holding the dead Charlotte, you notice that the puppet marionette was just had a blank face and everything. But then as soon as the scene ended, that's when they got the tear tracks, and that's when they had the soul of Charlotte inside of them. I thought that was great. I also thought it was interesting of how Charlotte being a villain in this movie and everything, that screams the book trilogy. Charlotte was revealed to be a robot, and not only that, but they were a villain at one point in the series. They were a villain mainly because, kind of similar to Cassidy, but not in the same way, just a little bit half-baked. They were vengeful because they were killed outside the pizzeria by William Afton, and no one came to save them, so that made them vengeful. Now let's get into YouTuber cameos. Unfortunately, as much as I love this series, as much as I talk about it, no, I was not luckily and privileged enough to be part of the FNAF universe and make a cameo. But maybe for the final movie in the trilogy, I will get the opportunity. So Scott, my email's always open, my guy. Handful of cameos in this movie. Matt Pat got another cameo in this movie. He voice acted Toy Bonnie, which was great. Another voice acting cameo. Kellen Goff voiced Toy Freddy, which is amazing, because I would say Kellen Goff, Heather Masters, Andy Field are like the three trifecta voice actors in FNAF at this point, where if there's any FNAF project, any FNAF game that involves voice acting, you can reliably assume that it's one of those three people, and they're all amazing. Kellen Goff voiced Toy Freddy. He voices mannequins from Seek of the Mimic. Oh, and he also voices Funtime Freddy, of course. But beside FNAF, he also voices Overhaul from My Hero Academia, which is very, very cool. I just found that out recently, like a month or two ago. So I want to share that out to you just to show the vocal range of the GOAT, Kellen Goff. But overall, what did I think of this movie? I think it was very, very interesting as a second part in a trilogy. I liked it, but at the same time, I felt like it was overwhelming. I thought it was overwhelming because not only was I surprised how much they leaned into the fandom instead of the, general filmgoer audience. So much so, not to sound like I'm gatekeeping, but I almost don't recommend you see this movie unless you're someone like me who has played the games, has read the books, has kept up with the lore and story. I almost recommend you don't watch this movie simply because I feel like you'll be so confused of what is happening because of how much stuff they set up and how much they teased. And I'm concerned because I worry that if this movie is fully a trilogy, there's not a fourth or fifth or sixth movie planned, I am concerned that all these things got set up in the second movie, meaning they're all going to be wrapped up in the third movie in a satisfying way. I worry it's going to be overstuffed and there's going to be several plot points that come to an end that do not end in a satisfying way. I'm concerned about that. I honestly think that there needs to be a fourth or fifth movie planned for the things that you set up in the second movie to have enough breathing room so they can get the time they deserve to set up and end their plot points in the third movie, fourth movie, fifth movie, because ending it all in the third movie, I'm concerned that it's not going to be satisfying. It's going to feel rushed and half-baked. I'm hoping that there's future movies planned. I know Matthew Lillard signed on to do a trilogy because of the success of these movies. Matthew Lillard, Scott Cawthon, Emma Tammy will all look at this saying like, you know what? They are a huge box office hit. The first movie is Blumhouse's biggest movie, box office wise, they've ever done. And the second movie that just came out, despite it being released in December, and you're having to compete with Zootopia 2, you're having to compete with Avatar that comes out in a week, you're having to compete with Wicked, FNAF, in a box office opening weekend, debuted to number one, outbeating Zootopia, a Disney sequel that the original made like $1 billion. I'm hoping that they can look at those numbers and make more movies just so they can flesh out and iron out all the teases and setups they did in the second movie. I think with all the setups and teases they had with Sister Location, they have to have a movie that is talking about Sister Location. But the third movie is all about FNAF 3 and Fazbear Friday Springtrap, which has nothing to do with Sister Location. So overall, as I'm wrapping up here, answering the question that everyone wants to know, did I enjoy this movie more than the first movie? And yes, I did, but I'm not going to give it a 1 out of 10 or 5-star rating simply because I feel like I can't rate it because I need to see the trilogy. I need to see the story wrap up and everything, so I can't give it a rating. It's kind of the same thing of the Spider-Verse movies, where I can't rank Beyond the Spider-Verse, I can't rank the second movie until I see the third movie and how the story wraps up. I cannot rate it on its own because the story is not finished yet. They've had so many teases and setups that I need to see the story wrap up. And then we can go back saying, okay, yeah, this movie was in fact better than the first movie. Maybe it was the best in the trilogy, or it was the weakest in the trilogy because the third one was an absolute banger, 9 out of 10.